This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by CRY HAVOC. From New York Times #1 best-selling author Jack Carr. CRY HAVOC, a Tom Reece thriller. Order now.
Prologue. Laos, May 1968. It was the absence of sounds that alerted him. The jungle, itself a living, breathing creature, spoke to those who knew its secrets. A pause in its natural rhythm was a warning. Intruders had violated its sanctity. The jungle is neutral. That's what Dad used to say after he got into the brown water. That was a different time, a different war. The jungle remains neutral. Supposedly, so did Laos, but only on paper. In reality, Laos allowed the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, to resupply units in South Vietnam in direct violation of the 1962 Geneva Accords. To do so, they used the Trong Son strategic supply route, known in the West as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That was where MACV-SOG came in and why Thomas Reece, Gunner's Mate First Class, SEAL, United States Navy, lay sweating on the jungle floor in the oppressive humidity beneath the triple canopy that kept his world in a perpetual state of dusk. His ears, nose, eyes, and mouth were under attack by hungry, malaria-ridden mosquitoes, while the leeches that had found their way under his clothing were swelling to the size of thumbs with his blood. MACV-SOG was the rather innocuous name for Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. With operators selected primarily from the ranks of the 5th Special Forces Group, MACV-SOG recon teams were tasked with prosecuting the secret war across borders in Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam. Though the team did study and observe, more often than not, they brought death and destruction to the enemy on their home turf. They had become so effective that the NVA had deployed specially designated hunter-killer teams focused on neutralizing the SOG threat. Trained by the 305th Sapper Command, the NVA enlisted the assistance of expert local hunters and trackers, offering sizable bounties for any SOG personnel, dead or alive. Tom ever so slightly tightened his grip on the chopped Soviet-designed Chinese-made 7.62 by 39 RPD machine gun. He had modified it by shortening the barrel and removing the bipod to give him a weapon that felt closer to Eugene Stoner's famed Stoner 63 that Tom had carried on his last SEAL deployment in the Rung Sat Special Zone in the swamps of the South. Things were different in the mountains of Laos, but what remained the same was the need to unleash as much chaos as the gods of war would allow when there was no choice but to go kinetic. A Montagnard mercenary lay an arm's length to his left, another to his right. The name Montagnard came from the French and translated as inhabitant of the mountains. The indigenous fighters came from tribes of the Central Highlands and had formed a close alliance with American Army Special Forces teams. The Yards had sensed it too. The specter of death that hung over them in the perpetual mists of the highlands was descending. Once the rain started, it would make it hard for aircraft to identify the small element on the ground, a complication that meant no air support. They would be on their own. A benefit would be that the rain would allow them to move more quickly through the jungle, masking the team's movement. As they were well aware, it did the same for the enemy. At present, it was not the 22 varieties of poisonous snakes that infested the jungle that concerned Tom Reece. Neither was it the venomous spiders or foot-long centipedes and their toxins, nor the tigers that would trigger the ancient superstitions of his Montagnard teammates. It was not even the elephants that had once trampled a SOG hide site. Tom's primary concern was the element of NVA soldiers converging on his team's position. Don't fucking move. The team was arranged in a tight circle facing outward. As the 1-1, Tom was second in command. The leadership role landed on Frank Quinn, the 1-0, a veteran SOG operator with Native American blood who had forgotten more about running ops across the fence than Tom thought he would ever know. Their fellow SOG brethren called them the Odd Couple after the recent Neil Simon film starring Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, though none of them had yet seen it. New releases were hard to come by at FOB1 in Fubai. Their partnership, one young Navy SEAL and one older Army Special Forces veteran, was unique in the annals of MACV-SOG, but it was hard to argue with their results. Quinn demanded the best, and Tom gave it. Even in the highly compartmentalized world of SOG, they had developed quite the reputation. This operation was a typical wiretap mission to record transmissions along an NVA communications line. Upon returning to base, they would turn the physical recordings over to the intelligence analysts for exploitation. What made this task not so simple was that it was taking place across the border in Laos along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Though they had removed the tape from the recording device and re-spooled the wires from where they had attached them to what amounted to a phone cable, their scent lingered. That meant they could be tracked. Nothing was overlooked or left undone when it came to blending in. They had only eaten Vietnamese food with no spices for 4 days prior to the op. In Indian country, one wanted to smell like an NVA soldier. The entire team was under a no showers, no soap, no deodorant, and no smoking order in the lead-up to a mission. Detergent was never used to clean their olive drab fatigues. They had worn their op uniforms for 3 days before insertion and even took constipation pills to stuff them up while they were across the border. Leave no trace. The 2 Americans and 6 Montagnards all wore sterile uniforms. No name tags, unit patches, rank, or any other insignia adorned their clothing. No dog tags were worn around necks or attached to boot laces, though Tom wondered why they bothered. The NVA knew all about SOG teams and was well aware of the impact they were having in Laos, which was why Hanoi had diverted critical resources to training the teams hunting them. In the jungle, one could feel an enemy before the other senses registered their presence, before one heard a twig snap, observed the unnatural movement of a branch or leaf, or smelled the dried hot peppers or strong nok mam fish sauce favored by the Vietnamese seeping from sweat glands. Sometimes an enemy element would patrol right through a SOG perimeter and continue on, never knowing how close they had come to discovering the teams that dared venture into denied territory. It was the smell of fear-laced sweat that could give one away in the jungle. You had to become a part of it and make it a part of you. While Tom carried the RPD, Quinn armed himself with the Carr 15, as did each of their Montagnard teammates, aside from their point man who dressed like an NVA soldier and carried an AKM Type 56. 6 members of the 8-man team carried 3 claymores each. The yard point man and M79 gunner carried 1. That gave Recon Team Havoc, as their FOB commander had designated the joint Frank Quinn-Tom Reece Army-Navy team, 20 claymore mines, which was more than any other operational SOG element. Quinn had insisted on it. That standard operating procedure had allowed Havoc to chain-link 7 claymores just 10 feet away, the bold front toward enemy emblazoned on their green fronts. They were set against thick tree trunks to protect Havoc from the violent back blast of an amassed 10.5 pounds of C4. The detonation would send a combined 4,900 steel ball bearings ripping through the jungle at 4,000 feet per second, turning any living creature on the receiving end into pink mist. Another 5 claymores were arranged behind them in a layered defense pattern attached to time fuses that would be primed as they passed by, beating a hasty retreat. To their flanks, the team had put out 4 toe poppers and 2 frag grenades on tripwires. Tom had replaced their standard 4.5-second fuses with smoke grenade fuses that had a 0-second delay. Best case scenario, the NVA would pass by completely unaware. Countless times, Havoc had remained motionless, as enemy soldiers stepped within feet of the camouflaged team, never the wiser. Tom used all his senses to filter and assess information, including the 6th sense that Quinn preached was the most essential of all. If they can see you, they can hit you. If they can hit you, they can kill you. Don't let them see you. And if you see them, you better shoot first. Do not hesitate. If this went to shit, Tom would clack off the 7 linked claymores. 4 of the 7 had Willie Pete grenades attached to their fronts, which would disperse gobs of burning white phosphorus into the approaching enemy. Tom's element would then fall back, tapping Quinn as they passed. Quinn's squad would remain online while Tom set up his section of the team at a slight offset. Quinn would then light the time fuse that would detonate his 5 additional claymores 3 minutes later. In the resulting chaos, Havoc would make their escape. That was the hope. But as they all knew, things in the jungle rarely went as planned. 40mm or Mike grenades from their M79s were to be used next, followed by hand grenades. Their rifles and machine guns were a last resort. As soon as they started shooting, the NVA would know their precise location and concentrate all their fire in that direction. Weapons like the claymores, grenades, and 40mm Mikes kept the enemy guessing and would be Havoc's primary means of deterrent until they had no choice but to go to the guns. They would then continue to fall back toward an emergency extraction point to be picked up by H-34 King B helicopters flown by South Vietnamese Air Force pilots. If they could summon fast movers for CAS, close air support, they would bring down a world of hurt on their pursuers. If. Tom remembered the days of his first deployment with SEAL Team 2 in the Mekong Delta where, as a new guy, he had carried the Ithaca Model 37 pump-action 12-gauge shotgun with duckbill attachment when walking point in blue jeans and Converse All-Stars. That seemed like a lifetime ago, when he and his fellow men with green faces rained down hell on Viet Cong patrols from ambush sites in the mangroves along the River of the Nine Dragons, as it meandered its way toward the South China Sea. The amount of firepower carried by his 12-man SEAL platoon caused the Viet Cong to think their force far exceeded their actual numbers. That was a different mission. Those were VC. In Laos, they were dealing with the NVA, an army that had been trained by the Soviets. Even at midday, it was gloomy beneath the triple canopy. At night, it would be pitch black. Tom felt comfortable in the dark. It provided a blanket of security. It also meant that an extraction was highly unlikely, keeping them behind enemy lines until at least sunup. They traveled heavy, much heavier than Tom had when operating in the deltas of the South. Laos was an area that by international law was off-limits, which meant it might be a while before they could contact the FOB through an overhead air asset or their top-secret Hickory radio relay site to request extraction. In these situations, extra magazines and grenades were more useful than anything out of a sea ration. As Quinn was fond of pointing out, I'd rather be hungry than dead. Tom's first-line gear consisted of a Browning high-power 9mm pistol in a black leather holster on his right side, and an integrally suppressed .22 caliber high-standard HD semi-automatic pistol on his left. A Randall-made Model 14 knife with its 7.5-inch blade and black micarta handle in a weathered brown leather sheath was on his right hip, behind the Browning. Bo Randall's company in Orlando, Florida had been crafting knives since 1938, blades that had accompanied U.S. servicemen into the Second World War, Korea, and now Vietnam. The base tailor had modified Tom's fatigues and added extra pockets specifically sized for his signal mirror, notebook and pen, maps, morphine syrettes, a pen flare, whistle, compass, and his URC-10 emergency radio, along with a frequency and codebook. A fluorescent orange marking panel to signal aircraft and mark landing zones was stashed in one of 2 large cargo pockets on his pant legs. He wore black gloves with more breathable cloth on the tops and leather under the fingers and palms. The thumb, index, and middle fingers were cut off at the first joint. A Swiss Army knife in his right pocket was tied to a belt loop with green parachute cord. Everything had a purpose. Tom didn't dare look at the watch on his left wrist, a Rolex Submariner on a black nylon strap with 2 marine-grade snaps to which a leather cover was affixed to prevent reflection. A small Waltham compass was attached to the band just below the stainless steel case of the timepiece. The watch reminded him of Saigon, of the CIA, of Ella. "Not now, Tom. Stay focused."
The Sig Sauer P226X Legion, born from legacy, built for the modern shooter. Whether you're honing your skills on the range with the P226X Legion or carrying confidently with the P226X Legion Carry, the new Legion series delivers everything today's discerning shooter demands, right out of the box. With the new P226X Legion series, you're not just getting a firearm, you're entering a legacy of performance-driven excellence. This is the pistol for the modern shooter, refined, configurable, and crafted for excellence. Sig Sauer. Never settle. Since 2003, Bravo Company Manufacturing, founded by a U.S. Marine veteran in Heartland, Wisconsin, has been crafting mission-ready weapon components for professionals who demand reliability. Trusted by U.S. Special Operations Enforcement and responsible citizens worldwide, BCM gear is engineered and tested to perform in the most unforgiving environments. Every BCM tool is built and tested as if your life depends on it. Go to Bravo Company USA for more information. Bravo Company, American-made, duty-built.
Like most SOG operators, Tom's second-line gear was attached to modified World War II-era BAR, Browning Automatic Rifle, web gear. In Arctic canteen covers attached to the belt were his 4 additional RPD drums lined with strips of linoleum to prevent the open-link metal non-disintegrating belts and rounds from rattling. He had increased the length of each belt from their standard 100 to 125 rounds per drum. Every round mattered and could mean the difference between life and death for the entire team. A cut-down M79 was secured with a D-ring through the trigger guard on the left side of the harness. Additional BAR pouches carried 2 high-explosive 40mm rounds, 2 flechette 40mm anti-personnel rounds filled with steel darts, 4 frag grenades, 2 smokes, and a white phosphorus grenade. A canteen and a gas mask were situated behind the ammo pouches. An extra claymore was attached to his chest, blasting cap removed. Also on the web belt was a Frankenwarren Survival Axe Type 2, which he thought was superior to a machete due to its sharp hook that allowed him to cut vines regardless of which way it was swung. Anything that shined was covered with black tape. Anything that rattled was modified to keep unnatural sounds to a minimum. Of primary importance was a 12-foot section of green rope coiled and attached to his web gear. It would be used to tie a Swiss seat harness to clip onto a rope, the operators called strings, dropped from a helo to hoist them out of the jungle. Then it was a freezing ride at 7,000 feet for the hour-long flight back to Phu Bai. Quinn was similarly outfitted but ran his Carr 15 with 30 20-round magazines, each loaded with 18 rounds. For his secondary, he opted for the 1911 A145 pistol, one of only a few SOG pistols customized by gunsmith Armand Swenson. Instead of the Frankenwarren Survival Axe, Quinn carried a Special Forces-issued Peter Lagana hatchet from the American Tomahawk Company as a nod to his heritage, and because it was more effective than a blade for dispatching sentries. A specially designed Indig ruck, the brainchild of Conrad Bennett Ben Baker of the obscure Counterinsurgency Support Office hidden away in Okinawa, Japan, SOG's own Q branch from the popular James Bond films, held Tom's third-line gear. In it, he stowed an extra canteen with water purification tablets taped to the outside. They supposedly killed whatever microorganisms lived in Laotian streams, and he hoped counteracted the Agent Orange defoliation chemical the U.S. blanketed over the jungle from the air. The pack also contained a medical kit, 6 extra grenades, 3 more smokes, 8 M79 rounds, additional claymores that now lined the perimeter, and a small plastic tube of indigenous rations also developed by the ingenious Ben Baker that consisted of pre-cooked, lightly seasoned rice with fish, shrimp, or meat laced with vitamin B. The most recon teams carried a single large man-portable radio. Tom and Quinn both carried PRC-25s. hefty, unwieldy communications devices that were their lifeline. They both believed it was worth the extra weight to have a backup. The PRC-25 was the most essential piece of equipment in their arsenal, capable of connecting them to A-1 Sky Raiders, F-4 Phantoms, F-100 Super Sabres, A-6 Intruders, and AC-130E gunships. To prevent the radios from falling into enemy hands, a thermite grenade was taped to the sides to melt them into oblivion if the team was about to be overrun. Each team member also carried handcuffs. They were always ready to grab an enemy combatant for their intelligence value. A live prisoner also meant 5 days of R&R in Taiwan or Thailand and $100 as a reward. Someone higher up the chain of command had figured that operators on the ground needed an additional incentive to carry an unwilling captive soldier out of the jungle when it might be much more efficient to simply slit their throat. Higher had been right. Instead of money and a vacation, the little people, as SOG affectionately referred to their Montagnards, on a successful prisoner snatch op, would be honored with a new Seiko watch from Supply. If rain didn't ground the aircraft, Havoc would make contact with the Air Force FAC aircraft overhead, call sign Covey, in a low-flying O-2A Cessna Skymaster, or possibly with a C-130 command post high above southern Laos. Coming over the radio with Prairie Fire Emergency would shift priority for all aircraft in the AO to the SOG team under fire. Next to the pilot was a Special Forces MACV-SOG soldier, a Covey rider, who could speak directly with the unit in contact on the ground, help direct strikes, and guide the recon team to their LZ for pickup. A favorite aircraft amongst all SOG teams was the slow and highly maneuverable A-1 Sky Raider, a venerable single-prop plane of Korean War vintage that could carry more than its own weight in ordnance. While jets typically had about 15 minutes of loiter time and had difficulty dropping ordnance closer than 250 meters to a team in contact, the A-1 could provide support for over an hour. It had an array that included cluster bombs, napalm, 250-pound white phosphorus munitions, and a 20mm cannon that could cut down the enemy within 5 meters of a SOG team in contact. This was extremely helpful as most contacts in the heavy jungle took place at distances of less than 20 feet. All SOG operators at one time or another had prayed to hear the distinctive growl of a low-flying Sky Raider screaming in just above the canopy. Recon teams out of FOB 1 were usually supported by A-1s from the 56th Special Operations Wing in Da Nang. They were the best in the business. Havoc had made contact in 11 out of their last 13 missions as a team. All of them had been wounded, but so far they had not had any fatalities. Tom knew that one day his frogman luck would run out. All he could do was hope that day wasn't upon them. Did Dad ever feel like this? Tommy gun in hand, battling the Japanese in World War II? Dad didn't have claymores. Tom shifted his eyes to the right. Even though he was less than 4 feet from Mang Hai, their Montagnard team leader, Tom couldn't see him. Mang was Tom's age but looked younger. He had been a replacement for Amu. Tom missed Amu. Quinn still carried the Montagnard's rosary in his pocket. Amu's wife had insisted upon it. His death had hit Quinn particularly hard. Mang lived for one purpose: to kill NVA. The AK round that had grazed Mang's scalp on their last mission only added fuel to his fire. The Montagnard hated the North Vietnamese more than the Americans did. Truth was, the Yards hated all Vietnamese. They had history. Rain began to fall through the mist. A part of the SEAL prayed they would continue on none the wiser. Another part was itching to cut them all down. This was war, a war that had claimed too many of his friends. It took all of Tom's strength not to wipe away the sweat that crept down from under the green cravat do-rag that obscured his dark blonde hair. The salty liquid traversed over his camouflage face paint to sting his eyes. He found that the cravat worked better for him than the boonie hat favored by Quinn. He also liked the fact that the prop wash of an approaching helo wouldn't blow it from his head. Maybe we're going to get lucky. Then he heard the clacking. NVA trackers would signal each other in the main element by tapping two pieces of bamboo together. Perhaps the trackers didn't have dogs. Then Tom heard the barking. Shit. This is about to get Western. They had unclipped the phone cable tap and were fading back from the trail into the shadows of the jungle when the enemy patrol appeared, forcing them into their perimeter behind the claymores. They had covered their scent with a mixture of CS powder, a potent irritant, and black pepper as they respooled the wires attached to the communications lines along the trail. The mixture was highly effective, though it did not work if the dogs had been fooled before. Bloodhounds used by the NVA were smart. If they had previously encountered the countermeasure, they would stop before getting close enough for it to destroy their sense of smell. Some would even circle around the concoction to pick up their quarry's scent on the other side. Tom prayed these were not those kinds of dogs. The barking stopped. Tom shut his eyes and focused on his hearing. A dog was moving around the countermeasure. He slowed his breathing. Steady. Tom gently removed the integrally suppressed .22 caliber high-standard HD semi-automatic handgun from the holster on his belt. The World War II-era pistol had been modified by Bell Laboratories for the Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor to the CIA. With the type of ammunition that made up the 10 rounds in the magazine and 1 in the chamber, it suppressed the shot to 20 decibels, or the sound of a light cough. The longer Tom's team could go without revealing their exact location, the better. Tom brought the pistol up as deliberately as he could. Havoc's advantage was stealth. The NVA had to move to find them, making noise, while Havoc could remain still, silent, and camouflaged. Get ready. The barking was getting closer, now from the flank. Havoc's claymores were set up facing the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was to Tom's 12 o'clock. The dog was approaching from his right flank, so the .22 would have to do. The barking stopped, but Reece could hear movement. An NVA tracker would not be far behind. You won't see him until he's almost on you. In SOG, they treated the dogs the same way they treated the NVA, as an enemy to be dispatched. From Tom's position on the jungle floor, the dog appeared much larger than it actually was as it materialized out of the brush. The hound registered the prone American at the same instant a .22 caliber round left the pistol's muzzle without so much as a whisper. It was followed by 4 more. From experience, Tom knew that dogs and humans could soak up a few rounds before going down. The brown and black-colored bloodhound dropped inches from Tom's face. Sorry, friend. What was not expected was for his handler to appear right behind him as quickly as he did. The sound of the approaching dog had disguised the noise of the tracker. Reeling in shock at the sight of his dead dog, the NVA soldier's eyes went wide as the jungle floor came alive at his feet. Tom put a .22 round into his neck and another in the underside of his chin. At the same instant, the man's finger depressed the trigger of his Kalashnikov, sending a burst of 7.62 by 39 millimeter rounds into the dirt just to the left of Tom's head. He stumbled and fell on top of the SEAL, who put 2 suppressed rounds into his temple and another through his ear. More than one SOG operator had been killed by men they believed were dead. Learn from the mistakes of the departed. Once the shooting started, if you weren't moving, you were dying. The NVA, with their superior numbers, would flank you in a heartbeat, hence the toe poppers and frag grenade tripwires. And now the shooting had started. The jungle in front of Tom and his team erupted in automatic fire, all concentrated in the direction of the dead dog and handler. There was no need to yell contact or fire in the hole. Havoc knew what was coming next. Tom depressed the Claymore's trigger, sending 3 volts of electricity down the firing wire into a blasting cap embedded in C4. This caused the detonation of a shaped charge that propelled the embedded steel ball bearings into a directional 60-degree arc of pain, tearing through the jungle foliage and the enemy marching through it. The backblast felt as though it dislodged Tom's teeth from his skull when the shockwave passed through his body, compressing his brain and internal organs in a nauseating surge of violence. The concussion and smoke were accompanied by a barrage of dirt, rocks, leaves, roots, and branches that showered the Americans and their Montagnard teammates with the vestiges of death. The explosion immediately robbed them of hearing, which quickly returned as a piercing ring that would follow them like devils on their shoulders. It was as if the universe suddenly inverted and just as quickly set itself straight, now a few souls lighter. Time to move. One thing to do first. Tom reached into his gas mask pouch and retrieved an AK mag, a special eldest son AK mag with a bullet 6 rounds down, modified to contain a high explosive in place of gunpowder, certain to destroy the rifle firing it. The bullet was also capable of maiming or even killing the shooter. Tom quickly removed a magazine from the dead man's canvas chest rig, secured it in his gas mask pouch, and replaced it with the eldest son mag, making sure to refasten the wooden toggle. Tom then slapped the Montagnards to his right and left. Staying as low as they could, they turned and moved through Quinn's squad, setting up about 20 yards behind and offset in the direction of their primary extract point. With any luck, this was a small NVA element, and those claymores had decimated most of them. Luck. Was it bad luck that an NVA patrol had appeared on the road just as RT Havoc had been removing their wiretap? Or was it something else? Recon teams were disappearing with increasing frequency these days. Not now, Tom, damn it. You can discuss it with Quinn over beers in the Green Beret Lounge at Fubai, but first you have to get to Fubai. The jungle erupted in gunfire, most directed at the position Tom's element had recently occupied.
This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by CRY HAVOC. From New York Times #1 best-selling author, Jack Carr. CRY HAVOC, a Tom Reece thriller. Order now.
Watch a CRY HAVOC teaser here, or watch another episode of the podcast.